Hello and welcome to Economics. Today we're going to begin our discussion with a little basic terminology and some of the more fundamental concepts within economics. These concepts, of course, if you've had the other course in economics, you've already seen, but we need to get back on target with them, and they're kind of sort of the language that we use in economics, and so we want to make sure that even if you've seen them before, that you're familiar with them once again. I guess probably a good starting point is to try to come to some conclusion about what exactly it is that we study in economics. And you can see a number of different definitions for economics. This particular one is how people use scarce resources to satisfy unlimited wants. So the basic economic problem can be referred to as scarcity, or it can be referred to as choice. And it arises out of the fact that humans have unlimited wants or unlimited desires for goods and services, but we live in a world in which resources are scarce. And so the study of economics is the study of how people make their decisions or make their choices about what goods and services will be provided in order to satisfy the unlimited wants and needs of people. Now, frequently we use the terminology goods and services interchangeably. In fact, I normally just kind of chain the two words together. I say both goods and services. From an economic standpoint, it doesn't really much matter whether it's a good or a service. But it is important for us to understand the difference in them. And the basic difference is that a good is something tangible. It's something that you can see, it's something you can feel, it's something you can touch, and so as a result, it seems more real to us. From an economic standpoint, however, it satisfies needs and wants in the same sense that a service would satisfy a need or a want. And services in our economy have become more and more important. Even though they are intangible, they've become a very important component of our society. In fact, today, the majority of what's produced in the U.S. economy is actually a service. So what sorts of things are services? Well, if a lawyer provides some advice, that's a legal service. If a barber cuts your hair, that's a service. If a gardener cuts your grass, then that's a service. So as you can see, a great many things that we enjoy the benefits of today, a great many of the things that we actually receive some satisfaction from are actually services. Today our society is primarily a service-based society. It's a service-based economy. We don't produce many goods anymore, we produce an awful lot of services. So if you think of something such as an athletic shoe as an example, we don't make the shoe, we design the shoe, we decide what sorts of shoes are the appropriate kinds and that will sell. We then distribute the shoe, we sell the shoe, that sort of thing, but the shoes are actually manufactured. The good itself is actually manufactured somewhere else. And that's the way we make our money today, is by providing primarily services. There are some things, however, that are not goods or services, and these are known as bads. And bads are anything that even at a zero price, people don't want them at all. And you can probably think of some great things of that sort. We used to talk a lot about free goods and services, but more and more we've come to the conclusion that there is no such thing as a free good or service. When I first started teaching economics, we used to talk about water and air as being free goods as an example. But the truth of the matter is, at least clean water and clean air is not free. It costs something to produce it. So this results in one of the old salts in economics: there's no such thing as a free lunch. Somewhere, someone has to do without something, make a choice in order to produce whatever that good or service is. So everything involves a cost. In order to produce goods and services, we need inputs or resources. And the terminology that economists use for resources is factors of production. This is anything that's used to produce goods and services. And the real reason that we have an economic problem or we have a problem of scarcity is because factors of production or resources are scarce. And so as a result of that, the resulting products, the resulting goods and services are scarce as well. Now, economists divide resources into 4 major categories. The first of these traditionally we refer to as land. And land more ideally should be referred to as natural resources. So it's not just the physical land that we see, but it's all of the naturally occurring attributes that go with it. So if it has minerals underlying it, then that's a part of land as well. If it has timber growing on it, then that's part of the land as well. If it has animals living there, then that's a part of the land. Or if it happens to be in a particularly good location, then that's a part of the land as well. It's a part of the natural attributes. It's not produced by humans. It occurred without any additional necessity. Labor is the second category, and labor is the human effort of a particular individual. It can be physical effort or it could be mental effort. It's the actual work of a human body, and so as opposed to what we just said about land, it is in fact all human created. In the case of land, there's no human creation to it whatsoever. In the case of labor, it's entirely human created. And it's, of course, exactly what you hope you can avoid if at all possible. The next category is called capital. Capital, too, is primarily a human-created factor of production. It's anything that has been created in a previous production cycle for use in this production cycle. So it's a sort of a savings account in a way. It's something where we make it this production cycle, so we make it in this year, and then we intend to turn around and use it for production in a future year. Now that can take one of 2 forms. It can be physical in nature, which is what we tend to think of. So it could be such things as machines, tools, plants, equipment. It could be financial capital. When you talk to business people and they say, I'm short of capital, what they mean is financial resources. And of course the financial resources they hope to turn into physical capital. But a very important component of it is what's known as human capital. And human capital is the skills, the experience, the training, all of the know-how that's invested into a human. And so that more and more today is an important component of capital for us, and less is the physical component important. Notice that what we have to do in order to accumulate capital is we have to do without today. We have to do without something that we would consume today in order to store it up for the future so that in the future we can have more production. So it's analogous to you putting money in a savings account. It's the way society puts money into a savings account. The next category is entrepreneurial ability. This is actually a very special category of human capital. It's the talent, the idea, the know-how, the ability to successfully operate a business. It's the ability to make it work. It's the willingness to take the risk. It's the ability to find new ideas, new innovations, and new inventions. These 4 categories make up all of the resources that we use to manufacture the goods and services that we produce. We then carry those to markets, which is simply a place where, and it doesn't have to be a physical place, it's a method of sharing information between buyers and sellers. And those can fall into one of 2 categories. They can be either product markets or resource markets. Now, a little later we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about how markets operate and how prices and quantities are determined and exactly what's necessary in order for a market to occur but right now it's sufficient to say that at least in our society, markets determine prices and quantities, which leads us to a very important model of how the economy works. And it's a model in which we look at the flow of resources, the flow of products, the flow of incomes, and the flow of revenues among the decision makers. And it shows us the importance, the value of the interaction between the two primary operators in the market, which are households and firms. So this is just kind of a graphical depiction of what goes on in an economy. There are two primary participants in the economy, households and firms. Households are the decision-making unit for people. Firms, on the other hand, are the decision-making unit for the production of goods and services. So we see that there are two primary decision-making units. There are also two primary categories of markets. There are product markets and there are resource markets. And so we see from this model, if you look at the outside ring, the blue ring on the outside actually shows us the goods and services and the resources moving from one market to the other or from one decision-making unit to the other. The yellow ring on the inside shows the flow of funds to facilitate that. So on the outside we actually have goods and services, which is the things that we're interested in, or resources, which is the things that we're interested in. On the inside is the way that we settle the accounts on those, so to speak. Now an important thing for us to see from this model is that both households and firms are simultaneously consumers and producers. Households, we tend to think of households as being simply consumers. In fact, we oftentimes refer to them as consumers. And by that we mean that they're consumers of goods and services. And so firms provide the goods and services, households purchase the goods and services, they expend their money buying the goods and services, and that flows back into the firms as revenue. So in that market, households are the consumers and firms are the producers. But notice in the pink market down at the bottom that households are in fact the producers. That households have all of the factors of production, all of the resources, and that they produce those and carry them to the resource market, and that those then are purchased by firms. So in resource markets, firms are the consumers and households are the producers. And you can also see, if you follow the money there, that the firms then pay for the resources and that becomes income to the households. So important points from this particular model are, it's important for us to understand that there are two primary groups which are the major participants in the market, and by the way they represent about 85% of the entire production within our economy. There are two primary groups. There are households and firms, and that both groups are not just consumers, they're both consumers and producers. Both groups are consumers in one market, but they're producers in another market. So when we think of ourselves, we're not just a consumer, we're also a producer as well. Now we don't typically think of ourselves as being producers because we spend more time as consumers making decisions as consumers and less time making decisions as producers. So once you've signed your contract for the year, you don't think anymore about the fact that you are providing resources, your work, to your employer. However, you make transactions throughout the day, every day, and so you think of yourself as a consumer, but you're also a producer as well. Remember that anytime we make choices, it requires time and it requires information. It doesn't strike you as odd that time is a scarce and valuable resource, but information is a scarce and valuable resource as well. And one of the reasons that the internet has been so successful is that it increases the amount of information that's available, or it reduces the cost of acquiring that information. In order to make your decision, you're willing actually to pay for information to a certain point because it improves your choices. But you will only acquire information to the point where the additional benefit exceeds the additional cost. And so the fact that the internet lowers that cost means that we're much more rational decision makers. We're able to continue to accumulate information which may or may not be helpful because the additional cost is so low. And so the decision making has improved due to the fact that the information is more readily available. So making decisions is a choice as well as other choices. Along that same lines, one of the terms that we frequently use in economics is the term marginal. And marginal means the incremental or the additional or the extra. So if we think about what is this going to cost, we're thinking what will be the additional cost, what will be the extra cost. And for most decision making, as we saw in the last slide, for most decision making, we will buy when the expected benefit, the expected marginal benefit, is equal to the expected marginal cost. Now this is an idea that we'll come back to later on and that will show up over and over again, but I want to get you used to the terminology of marginal, which just simply means the extra or additional. We'll continue to purchase as long as we believe the extra value to us, what we're going to get out of it, is greater than what it's going to cost. And when we reach the point where what it's worth to us, what we're going to get out of it, is equal to the cost, then we stop at that point and don't accumulate anymore. This leads us to the idea of macroeconomics versus microeconomics. Micro, the term micro, the prefix micro typically means small, and that's exactly what it means here. In microeconomics, we study the individual choices, the individual decision maker. So we talk about, well, how will a particular household make a decision faced with this set of circumstances? Or we'll talk about how an individual firm will react in this set of circumstances. Macro, on the other hand, the prefix macro means large, and so in macroeconomics we're concerned with the performance of the whole, the performance of the entire thing. So instead of talking about individual household, we'll talk about the decision making of households in general. Or instead of talking about individual firms, we talk about the decision making of firms in general. How will business react to this rather than how will this specific business react to this? Both of them are important. Both of them, of course, inform our decision making, and both of them, of course, take different ways of getting to the same sort of thing. Now, we said to begin with that economics is the study of scarcity. In economics, we attempt to produce a theory or a model, but we need to always remember that it is a simplification. In order to, and another way of thinking of that is it's a generalization of what's actually going to happen. By necessity, it requires us to leave things out. It requires us to overlook certain things. And the real acid test of an economic theory or an economic model is how good a job does it do about predicting the real world. Unfortunately, oftentimes it doesn't do as good a job as we'd like for it to do, and one of the reasons it doesn't is because economics is a social science. We're attempting to predict the behavior of people, and people don't react in the same way that things happen in the physical world. As an example, in chemistry, if you combine two ingredients together in the same amounts and under the same conditions, you always get the same solutions. Unfortunately, that doesn't always work that way in economics. It doesn't work that way in sociology and doesn't work that way in psychology. People faced with the exact same circumstances will react differently in different situations based upon how they feel on that particular day. So they may change their behavior. So we're always trying to predict or make a theory or make a model about the behavior of people, and yet we know that people's behavior is not stationary. It changes, it's dynamic. It changes from one time to another. And so as a result, we can make generalizations and hope for the best, but we don't always achieve what we had hoped to achieve. In so doing, we make a distinction between positive and normative economics. Positive economic statements are assertions about reality. So if we say the unemployment rate is rising, then that's an assertion about the reality. It can be either supported or rejected by evidence. It's either true or false. It's what is. It's the way things are. On the other hand, normative economic statements, which you very frequently see, are opinion about how things should be. Now, we try to steer clear of normative economic statements if at all possible, and the reason we do is built into a normative statement is a value judgment. So if we make the statement, everyone should have a job, we actually have embedded in that an opinion or a value. The value being that work is an important part of human life. That probably is a fairly widespread opinion, but it's not universal. There are some people who probably don't believe that that's the case. So to the extent that we can stay with positive economic statements, and here that doesn't mean happy and joyous, to the extent that we can stay with positive economic statements, we can build a model or we can build a theory which is actually testable. We can't build a theory and we can't build a model on the basis of opinion. And so as a result, we try to steer clear of normative statements as much as possible in order to build something that will in fact actually be testable. And that again is the ultimate test in economics. We build a model or we build a theory and then we turn around and test it and see if it actually does a good job of explaining the real world around us. Now, there are some potential problems with building a model and some that we frequently see in economics. The first of these is the belief that association implies causation. And here we might have event A happens and event B also happens. They're associated in time, so event A must cause event B. My favorite example of this sort is that if you count the number of crab boats in the Bering Sea and compare it with the temperature in Atlanta, Georgia, you'll see that the two of them are related in some fashion. That is, the more crab boats that you see in the Bering Sea, the colder the temperatures appear to be in Atlanta. We have no model that would cause you to believe that those two are related. They are only associated because they have something in common. They both occur in the winter. And so as a result, there is an association there, but there's no reason for causation. That's why it's important for us to build our model first, to develop our theory first, and say there should be some reason why this causes this, and then to test it, rather than test it first and say, well, this must cause this because the two of them are associated. The second problem that we can run into is known as the fallacy of composition, which means what's true for the individual is also true for the group as a whole. A great example of this is that if you go to a concert and you stand up on your chair in order to see better, you'll be able to see better until everyone else stands up as well, and then you won't be able to see better. And so this is the fallacy of composition. What would be true for you as an individual, that is standing up on a chair causes you to be able to see better, will not necessarily be good, will not be true for everyone in general. And finally, a last potential problem is the mistake of ignoring the secondary effects, and this is often known as the unintended consequences. It is often the case that we set out to do something good to affect people's behavior in a particular way, and we fail to recognize that there are some secondary happenings as a result of that behavior. A great example of this is that if we attempt to save a firm and keep it from going under, that what we may succeed in doing is cause the firm to take greater risk in the future and to change its behavior not only in the present but also to change its behavior in the future. And there are many examples of where we've ended up causing things we didn't intend to cause by trying to do some good. Well, those are some sort of basic ideas, some basic terminology that we're going to need throughout the remainder of the course. We'll stop there for this time and come back next time and talk a little bit more about scarcity and how we might measure that scarcity and how it impacts our decision making both on a micro level, a microeconomics level, but also on a macroeconomics level as well. Thanks for being with us, and we'll see you next time.